Audio Jungle.
Hey, it's Todd Seavey.
And Gerard Perry.
Seavey and Perry on Culture. And one exciting thing happening this season is a new version of Robocop is in theaters. I hope it's as funny and postmodern as the original. For those old enough to remember the original, did you like Robocop the first time around?
This is quite embarrassing. I've never actually seen Robocop.
What? How can you not see Robocop?
What kind of suit is this? It's not a suit, it's you. What the hell did you do to me?
Well, I would contend it was awesome, and of course spent a lot of my teenage years going to geeky movies like Robocop. I will admit, though, it does not hold up as well as some of those old films. Like Total Recall, for example, by the same director, Paul Verhoeven, I would contend is a perfect film. It doesn't have to be changed at all. It was absurd to do a remake of that recently. Robocop, a little trashy. You know, there's some guys like screaming and going arg as they're melted by toxic waste and other schlocky things that probably belong in a trauma film. But there was a kernel of brilliance there. It was postmodern. It made you think the future was going to be filled with not just strange robots, but ridiculous advertising. And a lot of it seems to have come true. The first one definitely had its funny moments, gave us memorable lines like, I'd buy that for $1, and you're fired to someone who's about to be killed. I hope the new one will at least have a little bit of that sort of lightheartedness. I don't know if we can count on it. It will have a nerd-pleasing cast, which is probably a good idea. So figure Samuel L. Jackson is in it, Gary Oldman, Jackie Earle Haley, who played Rorschach in The Watchmen, amongst other things, and Michael Keaton, who was Batman in the Tim Burton Batman movies you were talking about earlier. If the constituencies for each of those nerdy past films at least comes in, it should do fairly well.
We are on the eve of a technological revolution.
But the real question is, will people see its connection to current real-world politics? You'd think, in a way, it wouldn't be necessary to remake so many movies about evil robots from the 80s when you could just turn your camera outside the window and do a documentary about drones and war robots in real life. 30 years ago, you figured there were stories like X-Men comics that had giant evil Sentinel robots. There was the original Robocop movie. These are both being remade. There's a new Terminator coming out next year, supposedly. In a way, all of these things, even though they're being remade, have been outpaced by reality. I think the only way you can make it seem like it makes sense to remake them is if you tie it directly into what's going on in the real world now. The prophecy of the 80s has been fulfilled, basically. The sci-fi has come true. I hope they acknowledge that in all these movies.
The dystopian future has arrived.
We live there. We live in dystopia.
We live and experience it if you are unfortunate enough to be on the receiving end of a SWAT team raid looking for drugs, or in the case of Justin Bieber, the implements of destruction that he used to attack his neighbor, namely eggs, which is kind of an interesting example of what Radley Balco has decried and explored brilliantly in his book, The Rise of the Warrior Cop, which is essentially about the increasing militarization of domestic police forces.
This is the future of American justice.
And it looks like the new Robocop has bigger foreign policy implications than the first one. The first one was basically just about Detroit being a hellhole, and now it's arguably an even bigger hellhole than it used to be. But also, the characters in the new version say things like, oh, well, we're already using robots to police areas overseas and make them peaceful and better. Why not do the same at home? And the audience is free to draw the conclusion that maybe we don't want that sort of policing at home. There are shots of Muslim-looking foreigners cowering as the Ed 209 type robots stalk their homelands. Maybe we don't want Detroit to end up like that. So the globalization of the story and the robotics seems to be an element in the new one that, again, keeps it timely. It sort of reminds me that if Ridley Scott does the unthinkable, and as he's been threatening, does a remake of Blade Runner, I also hope that will acknowledge that rather than just kicking the can down the road and saying, oh, it takes place in an unclear future, it'd be nice if it sort of addressed the present and if he makes the horrible mistake of making a sequel or a remake, acknowledges that biotech and stranger advertising and a globalized world are already part of our reality, instead of just treating it like a distant, barely relevant future.
I actually think Ridley Scott would be on, as horrific as it sounds to remake one of the iconic science fiction films in cinematic history. I actually think he's on firmer ground working in that métier than the historical epic, which usually exposes his poor grasp of history and geopolitics and sociology, among other subjects that he's not.
Maybe right. I wonder how Detroit will come off looking in this new movie. I mean, if it's addressing foreign policy things, people might not focus on that specific city as much. But since it just recently went bankrupt, now's not a bad time to depict it as a dystopia. We, by contrast, are here at the Lock Yard in Brooklyn, an excellent bar in a neighborhood we really like. But meanwhile, in Detroit, you figure, half the population has left over the last 50 years, many of them since the first Robocop came out. So they're trying to figure out what to do with the vast swaths of abandoned housing, maybe just pave it over and create parks so it won't look as blatantly abandoned. The hipsters have noticed it because of the cheap real estate, and some of them are moving in and trying to revitalize it, I suppose.
You ready? This Detective Alex Murphy and Officer down!
And when you're selling off priceless paintings from the Detroit Institute of Art and other municipal treasures, I don't know if you actually have the resources to fund your own cyborg army to police. It would have to be one of these federal, state grants, no doubt related to the drug prohibition laws.
Maybe lots of Robocop-themed merchandising is what Detroit needs. Maybe a Robocop theme park.
It's possible. Don't they have a statue of Robocop?
I think that's right. Actually, I think there was a recent attempt to move part of the Justice League in the Justice League comics there because
revitalize the city.
One of the DC writer-editors is originally from that area and probably has fond memories of the brief period in the early 80s when the Justice League was headquartered in Detroit. But the one character they were trying to peg that to, Vibe, who back in the day was the one breakdancing superhero, didn't really end up being popular when they brought him back recently. So I think the Justice League Detroit idea has already fallen into obscurity. Oh well. Speaking of which, slightly switching topics, one bit of news in pop culture that came up while we were preparing for this is that the Batman-Superman movie has been delayed and will not come out until 2016 now. I'm a little disappointed by that, and I can't help thinking that if I were DC Comics, I'd be really worried, because it means that over the course of the next 2 years, 2014 and 2015, DC Comics will have 0 films out, and Marvel will have 8 out. So if the public is at all likely to get sick and tired of superheroes, it's really, it's not going to be good for DC. After 8 Marvel films, the public may say, enough already, and then DC will finally be ready with Batman and Superman.
Well, hasn't Marvel already eclipsed DC in the public imagination, not necessarily among comic book aficionados, but the general public, people who, the theater-going public?
Well, you figure the Batman movies have done really well. And about a third of the comic books DC Comics sells are Batman, so he is really disproportionately the thing they're invested in. But Marvel does seem to have, as it were, a more polycentric universe where they've got Spider-Man and the X-Men and the Avengers and Fantastic Four, so they don't quite have all their eggs in one Justice League basket the way that DC does.
So you're saying DC is over-leveraged on Batman, Batman-themed productions?
I think the Justice League has a monopoly on the DC universe, which I suppose may mean it's good that they're delaying the Batman-Superman movie by a year, because they'd better get it right. It's supposed to be the launching point for, a Justice League franchise. If you screw up the Justice League, DC has almost nothing left.
Haven't they tried other iconic DC superheroes, making them into successful movie?
There've been a few little attempts. None of them have been huge. I suppose Swamp Thing did all right. I guess that was also back in the 80s.
It's a cult classic.
Constantine with Keanu Reeves wasn't that big. Although, interestingly, Keanu says he would still like to play the role again someday. I don't know if he will. Guillermo del Toro actually says he would like to do a movie with Swamp Thing and some of the other supernatural DC Comics characters, but I don't know if that'll happen. Guillermo del Toro, much as all of us nerds love him, has a habit of saying he's really interested in a variety of projects and then not getting around to doing them. Or in the case of his H.P. Lovecraft movie, The Mountains of Madness, which would take place in an alien-filled Antarctica, the studio just didn't go for it. He tries.
Maybe the production costs were too high. Maybe you wanted to move the film site to the Antarctica.
That could be expensive. I assume it was going to be all CGI, but I don't know. It occurs to me, by the way, there are still other robot and artificial intelligence movies out this year. We haven't even mentioned, like Transcendence, where artificial intelligence, or I guess a scientist successfully transfers his mind into an AI program, and then it comes to life and starts taking over the planet, and appears to have telekinesis or something. I don't know, maybe it's nanites flying in the air, but it looked like there was some fishy telekinetic stuff going on. That probably won't happen, no matter how smart the computers get. And then Her.
Oh, the romantic comedy with Joaquin Phoenix, who I can't watch any longer because I automatically picture him as Johnny Cash whenever I see it. So even The Master, I had that problem whenever the dialogue would involve his character. Stamps his career, his iconic role, but on the other hand, it's hard to branch out when you're associated with that character. It's kind of like Kevin Sorbo and Hercules. Can anyone take him seriously in another role? Not that his film career is...
Last I heard, I think Kevin Sorbo was going to appear in a libertarian movie alongside Knight, based on an anarcho-capitalist sci-fi novel.
He is one of the few avowedly right-wing figures in Hollywood, even though I suppose there are more of them now than pre-David Horowitz. The Wednesday, I think it was called the Wednesday Club, the open meetings of Hollywood conservatives / libertarians, actors who didn't necessarily subscribe to the typical left-wing nostrums that you'd expect.
And it'll be interesting to see what the political impact, intended or unintended, of the new Robocop is, I suppose, since it could simply be an anti-authoritarian message, watch out for the military-industrial complex and corporations cooperating with police in creepy ways. On the other hand, the original was very explicitly anti-capitalist. A lot of mockery of advertising and corporate culture, boardroom culture, and by the third Robocop movie in the original series, even an explicit anti-capitalist revolution with scruffy rebels in the street attacking Omni Consumer Products, the company that created Robocop. So we don't know which way this will go, but the fate of the political world may hinge on the new Robocop. Thanks for listening to our opinions on it, and Seavey and Perry will discuss other such things in the future.
We'll see you next time.